heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 339, covering the week of January 9th through January 13th, 2023. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab and Facebook pages, and subscribe to our YouTube page. YouTube page really is invaluable. We'll talk about it today on the podcast because of a lecture, but you've got all kinds of great stuff out there free of charge. In fact, we're going to start putting, for at least for a time, our Zoom webinars on YouTube right after they're finished. So if you miss them, you can always catch them there. But you want to get on that YouTube page, and if you want to support the Institute from YouTube, just click on that little super thanks button under the videos when you watch them. We've got all of our lectures out there that we have in video form. We've got the podcast. We've got our Abbeville U videos. Just a lot of great stuff on the YouTube channel. You can also support the Institute by clicking on the donate button at abbevilleinstitute.org. That's ABBEVILLE. Click on that donate button. We do exist on your generous contributions alone, so if you like everything that we do, please consider that tax-deductible donation. It is tax-deductible to the full extent of the law. You can also support the podcast by rate, reviewing, and subscribing to the podcast. Give it that 5-star review. Leave a text review wherever you get your podcasts. And share it around on social media. Let people know you love it. That's how you support us and how you support the program and how you support everything we do. Now, a couple of housekeeping things. I mentioned Zoom webinars. We have one coming up January 28th. It is a Saturday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be on antebellum Southern conservatism, and we have a great guest coming up, Adam Tate, who has written a really good book on that topic. So you're going to want to check that out. It is free of charge to attend that Zoom webinar. So come on out, watch the Zoom webinar. You can ask questions live. That is the benefit to getting it live rather than getting it on a replay. You can actually ask questions. We usually take about 30 minutes for a Q&A. So if you ask a good question, your question might be answered live. So this is a great opportunity for you to see what we do on a regular basis. And that academic part is certainly a major component of the Abbeville Institute. We also have our 20th anniversary conference coming up in April 13th through 16th. You have to register by March 14th. So make sure you're getting out there and registering for the conference. You have to get your hotel room because, of course, we have to have all that set in stone, and you got to register by the middle of March. So you only have a couple of months left to make your plans to be there at Pine Mountain, Georgia, Callaway Gardens. It's a beautiful place. It is in the middle of a nature preserve. It's a private nature preserve. And it's just a beautiful place in April. You've got the azaleas blooming. You've got the Day Butterfly Center. Cecil B. Day, who was the founder of Days Inn. A lot of people don't realize that, but he is Southern. And you have so many other wonderful things. You've got a Birds of Prey show. You have golf. You have biking, hiking, walking trails, all kinds of beautiful stuff. A beautiful chapel in the middle of the woods with a waterfall and pond, and it's got a great pipe organ on Sundays. If you stick around in the afternoon on Sunday after we check out, you can hear a pipe organ concert. Just beautiful stuff at Callaway Gardens. So, and the topic is going to be great. It's the Southern tradition in the 21st century. We have great speakers. So it's a grand time, and you need to come out and be at this event. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But go to abbevilleinstitute.org and click on that events tab, and you get more information about the event itself. So we're really excited to be putting that event on, and we're going to, of course, have more Zoom webinars. We've got a lot of that scheduled on the books. We're going to start putting it on the website so you can start making plans, and we have plans for maybe another conference or two this year. So we're trying to put all that together. Plus, we've got the 1607 project we're working on. We've got some books that the press is going to be trying to do. So a lot of great stuff coming up in 2023. You got to stay tuned to this podcast and the website and the email list. Get on that email list. Give us that email address at abbevilleinstitute.org, and we'll give you a free ebook, and then you're on the email list. Do not unsubscribe from that. We do send out sometimes one email a day. It's not excessive. It's one a day. It's not a big deal, but don't unsubscribe from that if you do subscribe, because that's how you find out about stuff that we're doing. All right, well, let's talk about the material for the week. Now, again, we publish something 5 days a week. Sometimes they're eclectic, where they don't seem to fit together everything that week. I want to start actually with the Friday piece this week, which wasn't really a piece, it was a video. And I mentioned the YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has dozens of lectures from our previous conferences. And this one is no different. It's a lecture from our 2022 summer school, which was a great time, but it's on Southern music. And it was delivered by Tom Daniel. And, of course, the point he's trying to make is essentially the Southern origins of American music. And this is something that's going to be part of our 1607 project, to reorient focus onto the South and how important the South really was to the character of the American story. And it's not about slavery. It's not about race. There's so many things in this American story that come out of the South that are beneficial and positive things about the United States. And music, by the way, is one of them. It's as Tom has said many times in lectures that he's given for the Abbeville Institute, if you want to pick one thing where the South has just run roughshod over the North, it's music. It's music. The South dominates that particular area of quote-unquote American culture. They define it. And so when he does these lectures, it's not a long lecture, it's about 28 minutes, but he talks about how the Cavaliers and Virginia and the Appalachian region really created what we think of American music. And how vital that is, not just to the South and Southern history and Southern culture and the Southern tradition, but American history and American culture and an American tradition. And he tells a story at the beginning of the lecture where he says, he went to graduate school in Alabama, Auburn University, and he had a professor there that was Southern as he could get. And they said that there was no Southern music, that all music came out of New England. And this is how they were taught. This was in the textbooks that they got, and he was showing pictures of the textbooks. And how he taught it for a while until he started realizing and figuring out as he started doing more research that wasn't the case, that American music really did develop in the South. And it's not just the things we think about today where you have the major musical genres, but the character and the musical portion of it, the actual physical, tangible thing that's the music, not just the lyrics or the feel of it, but the music itself comes out of the South and the way we think about that. Now, of course, the response to this would often be, well, when you think about popular music, you have to start in the church. And you had Protestant churches that were writing a tremendous number of new hymns in New England in the 17th century into the 18th century. What you have to understand is the musical part of that was created by the South. And I'll just give you one example, and it's something we've talked about at some of our lectures before, both at summer schools and things we've done on the website. And one of the best is by Jim Kibler, and it is on YouTube to go out there and find this lecture by Jim Kibler on Singing Billy Walker. But Singing Billy Walker was the man who wrote the tune that we know as Amazing Grace, not the lyrics, but the tune. Because Amazing Grace had various ways to be played before Singing Billy Walker really formalized it. Singing Billy Walker was from South Carolina. His brother-in-law was Benjamin Franklin White, who was also from South Carolina, but then eventually settled in Georgia, in Whitesville, Georgia. And he wrote a collection of hymns called the Southern Harmony Musical Companion. Actually, that was Singing Billy Walker. The Sacred Harp is Benjamin Franklin White. I was having a moment there where I was thinking which one was which. Singing Billy Walker wrote the Southern Harmony Musical Companion, Benjamin Franklin White, the Sacred Harp. And both of these hymnals were essential for Protestant churches really from the 19th century forward. And again, how we think the tune of Amazing Grace, which has now been recognized around the world as the most American of all songs, came out of the South. Again, not the lyrics, but the tune. And so Southerners were putting their own spin on these New England hymns, and they were making them purely American with the music. So this is where you have to understand music, American music, comes out of the South. And Tom just always does a great job. We've got a little video, an Abbeville U video on YouTube that Tom does on Southern music. We've got several lectures from Tom on Southern music. You should check it out. Go out and get that. Go out and get those videos at YouTube on music. They're just tremendous videos, tremendous lectures, and of course he's also written for us at the website as well. So a lot of great stuff from Tom Daniel out there on music. But that's one part of everything that we do at the Institute, and it's such a great part of it. Again, the lectures are fantastic, the YouTube videos are fantastic, and I know that some people have really promoted those videos to their audiences, other podcasters, other people that go out there and do this kind of work. And look, that is our way to reach the masses. We've got one of the most recent videos we did was on this free webinar we did on Confederate monuments as art. And it's a beautiful video. I mean, talking to an art critic and historian about the real importance of these monuments outside of the message the monuments give, but it's the artistic value, the aesthetic value of these monuments that you cannot replace. Monument Avenue, as Case B. Lee talked about, was one of the true, beautiful monument avenues in the world. There was only a few. It was the most beautiful in the United States, and it's all gone. It's all gone, torn down in the name of political correctness and woke history. And that is the real tragedy about everything that's going on in America right now. This destruction that's taking place because of politics. Because of politics. Because of a social justice agenda that really has no impact. These monuments have no impact on anybody, anywhere, at any time in modern American society. They just don't, in terms of, a negative impact. Now, they have a positive, beneficial impact on the beautification of cities and tourism and other things. I mean, these things do have a positive impact in that way, and they are memorials, and they are a sign of history, so they certainly have a positive impact, but negative impact, zero. There's a zero negative impact on these monuments to anybody. I mean, if people weren't making an issue out of them, there would be nobody really care. That's the issue. Nobody really care if these monuments were sitting there. And so in terms of a negative reaction, again, positive. We've talked about positives all the time. People going tourists and seeing these things and understanding what they are. And in that way, we also had a piece this week on the Stonewall Jackson Monument at VMI, which was removed. And it was actually sculpted again by Moses Ezekiel, the same man whose monument is now slated for destruction at Arlington National Cemetery. One of the most beautiful Confederate monuments ever built, sculpted at Arlington National Cemetery, by the way. And we have a great video on that on our YouTube channel as well. But he did sculpt a statue of Stonewall Jackson as Moses Ezekiel attended VMI. In fact, he was the first Jewish graduate. And this particular piece by Forrest Marion really gets to the heart of the issue there. You have this Jewish cadet, the first Jewish cadet, and if this was any other situation, if it was any other American who was Jewish, there would the Anti-Defamation League, all of these Jewish American groups would be up in arms over the fact that you're taking down American Jewish history. But because it's Confederate, well, no one seems to care. And that's a travesty, because really this is, as Marion points out, a work of anti-Semitism. You're taking down one of the best expressions of Jewish culture in America that's ever been put there, whether it's the Stonewall Jackson Monument or whether it's the Arlington Confederate Monument. These are expressions of works of art by a Jewish American, a prominent Jewish American recognized around the world. He spent time studying in Germany as one of the foremost American sculptors. And so what are we doing here? Are we actually seeing on full display anti-Semitism? Or are we actually seeing the hypocrisy of the anti-Semitic crowd? That it's only anti-Semitism if it fits their political agenda. And I think it's very clear that's usually what happens. That they only cry anti-Semitism when it's something that really affects them politically. That it's not anti-Semitism if you take down something that a prominent Jewish American sculpted and created because it doesn't fit their political agenda. That's not anti-Semitism. We're just taking down this monument. But again, if the roles reversed, if Moses Ezekiel had sculpted a Union monument and we were going to take that down, all you would hear about is that Moses Ezekiel was Jewish. That's it. That's all you would hear about. It wouldn't be about anything else. It would be about that particular topic. So, Forrest Marion's piece on this at VMI. Of course, he attended VMI. And this is something that is very personal to him because cadets used to have to salute that Jackson statue, and now they're not going to do it anymore. And of course, again, Ezekiel attended the school, fought for the Confederacy at the Battle of New Market. I mean, it's such an important part of American history, and it's just being destroyed in the name of a social agenda. It's sad. It really is sad, and more than anything, it's barbaric that we're doing this now in modern American society. The Soviets did this kind of stuff. The Soviets were quick to take down anything that smacked of the old regime and replace it with something that was new and tolerable, and so a lot of Russian history was lost. For example, the Kremlin, which was a series of imperial palaces, but when Stalin came to power, he took out any artifact from the Tsarist regime and replaced the gold eagles that were on the spires with stars and all kinds of stupid stuff. I mean, he really destroyed art in the name of communism. This is what we're seeing now in America. We're destroying art in the name of communism. And it has to be called out as such. This is the agenda. This is the point. It is a Marxist, in a cultural way, a Marxist attempt to level society. So, again, it's a great piece by Forrest Marion. You got by Forrest Marion. You got to go out and get it. All right. So, a couple other pieces this week. We also had a really good, interesting piece, a book review by Casey Chalk. And this one is on a book that is very popular, I should say. Very popular. And the title is The Soul of the South. And Chalk, the title of the piece, the book is South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation. And it's written by a professor, Imani Perry. She's a Princeton professor, Imani Perry, and she's actually from Alabama, at least originally. She didn't spend much time there since she moved out apparently and then lived somewhere else. But she traveled around the South to try to figure out what the South was. And essentially, she had her own preconceived notions of what this was going to be. And how she characterizes Southerners is just laughable. And so Casey Chalk does a great job tearing down this book and tearing down this method of Southern history, Southern tradition, how to explain the South. But this is something you get, it's commonplace. To go in with a preconceived notion of what it is or what it's going to be. You could actually draw parallels to this with people who traveled to the South in the antebellum period. Essentially, that's what she's doing. Imani Perry has an idea. I'm going to see what the real South is. And she's going to go down there and she's going to write a story about it. Write a book about it. Now, in the antebellum period, you had abolitionists who would do this because they knew they were going to find all kinds of things in the South that would work against them. And not just that, it would verify and validate their views on the South in New England. Probably the most interesting book of all of those was a book written by a man named Nehemiah Adams. Now, Nehemiah Adams traveled into the South. He was an abolitionist with the sole purpose of confirming and validating his abolitionist beliefs. And what he ended up doing was writing a book that was the exact opposite of this. He still considered slavery to be morally wrong, that it should not continue. But he came away from his travels in the South with not a pro-slavery position, but at least an acceptance of Southerners that they weren't demons, they weren't devils, they weren't these horrible people that New Englanders had painted them to be. And that book got him into a lot of hot water in New England because it wasn't this vitriolic, hate the South kind of book. And essentially, if you are going to be honest, and this is what Casey Chalk is doing here. He's saying, look, I'm not from Georgia. His wife's from Georgia, but he's not from Georgia. He's from Virginia. But he does spend a lot of time in Georgia. He goes to the Appalachian region and other things. But so he is sensitive to anti-Southern positions. But he says the South I see is not this. It's not what she describes it as. And so you basically have two travel journals here. You have Perry's travel journal, south to America. And then you have this piece, which is, of course, much shorter. It's just a website article. But you have a piece that explains to him what you find in the real South. And again, he says the book really exposes more of what Perry is and her inner self than anything else. She's trying to validate all of her opinions about the South and, Red America through her travels there. And so she never really takes the chance or has the chance or takes the time to critically think about what she says about these things. It's a validation tour for her. And you had that from some of the abolitionists who would travel in the South. It was all validation, even though at times they would make some statements that would make you think, well, wait a second here. Are they really telling the truth about these things? They have to reinforce what they think, even if they're seeing something else. And that's often what you have in these things. Even when they see something, ideology, this is why ideology is so dangerous. Ideology makes them say something else because they have to validate their ideology, even if they see something else. So this is why we talked about ideology at the Abbeville Institute quite a bit. It's why we talk about it on the podcast, why we talk about it on various website articles or in lectures. Don Livingston is very good at this, but the danger of ideology. Perry is an ideologue, and because she's an ideologue, she has to make her worldview fit to that ideology, and that's the real danger, and that's actually very sad that you would have somebody do that, to fit their worldview to their ideology, no matter what they're seeing. They see an orange and they call it an apple. It's a dangerous thing on either side of the political spectrum. Tradition is not ideology. Tradition is custom, precedent. It's things hammered out over time, and ideology works against that all the time. So this particular piece was just fantastic, and I really liked it. You should go out there and get this piece and read it by Casey Chalk. The title again is "The Soul of the South." Now we did have again kind of eclectic stuff. We did have another piece on the war, "A Better Light" by Valerie Protopappas, which is essentially about the war itself and the causes of the war. And we do these things too. And I want to emphasize something about the Institute. When people think about the South, if you ask writ large across America, tell me about the South, they're going to focus on a few things. They're going to focus on race because you have people like Perry's book. They're going to focus on the legacy of slavery, whatever that is, which in reality is the legacy of emancipation and how that happened. Because black people, unfortunately, were just, as Lincoln said, root, hog, or die. They were thrown to the wolves. You are going to have people talk about the Confederacy. It's 4 years. So you're getting these very institutionalized views of the South based on American education and what that provides for Americans and how they think about things. But again, this is why Tom Daniels' lecture is so important, and why the 1607 Project is so important, and why these things that we do are important, because the South is hundreds of years of history. Now, we do the war, and we talk about the war. That's a 4-year period in the South. It is the most heroic expression of the Southern character of independence when you're looking at a people trying to declare their independence. Again, you could also say the American War for Independence is the same thing, but when they're going after that particular agenda. But we do the war, and one of the things we try to do with the war is explain the war in a way that would show the complexity of the event, that the war itself wasn't really about slavery. It was about preservation of the Union. And you have to understand that's the key. For whatever reason, even when you talk about secession, Virginia, for example, did not secede for the same reasons South Carolina seceded, at least when it comes to the public documents they put out. Though you could say they did secede for the same thing, which was the preservation of the Constitution. South Carolina thought the Constitution was dead. And when you compare the two secession declarations, one by a much more moderate member of the South Carolina Convention, which was much more interested in the issue of slavery than anything else, and one by a much more radical member of the convention, which actually had a long view of it, which talked about federal abuse and the abuse of the Constitution over all the years. You see that there's even a complexity there. So this is important to understand. The war itself was about preventing secession. It was about preventing self-determination and political independence. That was the war. Ending slavery was a byproduct, and Lincoln knew it well. And so when you go and you read this piece by Valerie Protopappas, and she explains this, we have this issue, Lincoln and the war, and what was the war, and what did Lincoln really want to do, and it's not about slavery. Lincoln was not concerned about ending slavery in 1861 when he called up 75,000 troops to put down the rebellion. Now, we know there were Northerners who were interested in ending the institution, and Lincoln was always interested in stopping the extension, what he called the extension of slavery, though, as Jefferson Davis pointed out, really wasn't the extension of it. It was just taking slaves from one place to another. But regardless, that term extension even has a Northern connotation to it. But Lincoln was he was anti-slavery in that he didn't want to see slavery in the Western territories. And why didn't he want to see slavery in the Western territories? Because he had the same views, racial views, that most people in the Western territories had, as even Eric Foner has pointed out in his book, Free Soil for Labor, Free Men. They just didn't want blacks around. There's several books on this, and actually Don Livingston, again, I'll trumpet some of these lectures he's done on YouTube, has done a fantastic job in pointing out this stuff. This is what Northerners were saying. We've done it also on the website, many different articles. This is what Northerners were saying about the institution. This is what Northerners were saying about black Americans. They considered the South to be the natural home for black Americans, and they didn't need to go anywhere else. We know that, for example, right after the war was over, 3 northern states had an opportunity to allow blacks the ability to vote, and all 3 rejected it. One of those states, in fact, was Connecticut. Connecticut, a New England state, which had such a minuscule black population. I mean, you're talking about less than 1% of the state population was black, and yet they still prevented blacks from voting at that time. So when we have this piece by Valerie Protopappas, I mean, it shows, we're talking about the war, but it shows the complexity in all this, and that's the important thing we have to understand here, the complexity of the issue of the war. And the war itself was about preventing secession. It was about preventing one of the most American things we have, which is self-determination and independence. It's what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration. Oftentimes people talk about how foundational the Declaration is. I mean, look, okay, well, Jefferson says that the people of any people anywhere, and even Lincoln said this, have a right to alter or abolish their systems of government. They have a right to do it. And this is what the South was doing. They were altering or abolishing their central system of government. They were getting rid of it. Now, this is why some Southerners said we needed a Declaration of Independence in the South, not just articles of secession or acts of secession, but an actual Declaration of Independence. That would have got into the legal issues, though. And the argument was, we don't need that. We need no declaration because it's already been done for us. And all we need to do is just resume our independent status that was established by our fathers, or grandfathers at that point, in 1776. We need no declaration. Secession was an expression of the understanding of the 10th Amendment that the states had reserved powers. It didn't matter why they were doing it. These were acts of political communities and popular conventions, and it was self-determination. So when Lincoln, bloviates about having, we're going to fight against tyranny, we're going to fight for a government of the people, by the people, for the people. He's blowing hot air, because the fact is they were fighting against that every time a Union soldier attacked and killed a Southern soldier who was fighting for independence. So that's the long and short of it. But you got to read Valerie Protopappas' piece. It's very good. And then, last but not least, we had a piece by Mark Andrew Holochek, a little piece on a canal in Virginia. What I find fascinating about this piece, he talks about this canal, and one of the things, some Southerners were interested in building internal improvements. That would be canals and railroads and these kind of things. Canals are inland, rivers, man-made rivers, essentially, man-made waterways that you can transport goods and people. And this particular canal in Virginia was the site of Stonewall Jackson's funeral procession. It was an important part of Southern history. But the people that operated the canal were black, right? Free and slave. And he talks about how there was a black slave owner who had boats and other things to use on the canal. He owned slaves, and those slaves would be workers on the canal. Well, that's not acceptable history. So I found that part of this piece, the historical part of it is interesting. He does a nice job telling the story, but that particular nugget stood out to me. That you had, and we know that this was the case, you had black slave owners all throughout the South. You had them throughout the South because that would just make sense. And as Larry Koger pointed out in his book, Black Slave Owners, which was specifically about South Carolina black slave owners, the institution, as black Southerners used it, was for profit. It wasn't the Woodson thesis, he calls it, which was a thesis put forward. Well, there were black slave owners, but they were just buying family members, and because they couldn't manumit them, they would keep them. But as Koger points out in South Carolina, that's not the case at all. People were buying slaves. Black Americans, free blacks, were buying slaves to use for profit. It was exploitation. So this is the same case with this man on the canal there in Virginia, using slaves for profit, which is what he was doing. So regardless, you have this very interesting complexity of Southern history and all the things that are going on. And slavery is bigger than just the South. And as people read more about it, they learn more about that. Oh, yeah, well, it is bigger than the South. There's a lot more going on here. It can't just be good and bad, black and white, very simplistic. That's the whole point of the Institute. All these things I've talked about today is the complexity of American history, and the real fabric of the South is much more complex than just the simplistic way that it's often described by people like Professor Perry and others. All right. Until next time, good day.